Hey everyone, and welcome to Generative Now. This is the podcast where we talk to the builders who are creating the world's most exciting AI products and companies. I am Michael Mignano. I am a partner at Lightspeed, and in this episode, we'll be featuring another conversation from one of our Generative NYC in-person meetups, this one from December of 2023. At the meetup, I sat down with Klinton Bicknell, head of AI at Duolingo. Now, you might not think of Duolingo as an AI company, but it turns out they've been using machine learning to power a lot of what they do for many years. And in the middle of this ongoing AI revolution, they're only leaning into AI a whole lot more. And so in this conversation with Klinton, we got into a lot of things like AI in education, what machine learning can teach us about the human brain, and where he sees further AI development heading. Check it out. Without further ado, please help me in welcoming Klinton Bicknell, head of AI at Duolingo. Thanks, Klinton. How's it going?
All right.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely.
So you have been, like I just said a minute ago, you have been thinking about the world of AI long before many of us in this room probably. Give us the story of your background and your journey to generative AI.
Sure. So, yeah, my journey to AI and into Duolingo is it's been a long and interesting one. If you go back far enough, I started going in this direction through cognitive science and the cognitive science of language. So understanding how the mind works, understanding how the brain works. I was doing research into that in academia. And it turns out that AI models, or machine learning models specifically at the time, can provide really good models of how humans do a lot of things and how the brain does a lot of things, thinking about the brain as optimization system, et cetera. And so I was doing research in academia. I was a professor at Northwestern into how people learn and process language by building kind of machine learning models that would act as sort of model systems that you could interrogate for how people can do these things. So that was kind of where I was, and the AI that I was doing, so it was very kind of interdisciplinary work at the time. And then about 5 years ago, Duolingo decided to start up kind of a proper AI group, and reached out to me to be one of the first people there. So seemed like the right fit at the time, the right time to make the move from academia into the exciting world of consumer tech. It's been a really fun ride since then.
So tons of questions about Duolingo, which we will get to, and that transition, because that does seem like a big transition, going from academia to consumer tech. But maybe focusing in on your experience that you were just talking about, your studies. I think so many of us, myself included for sure, have been so blown away by the power of large language models and really what is enabled by transformers, right? And definitely for me, and I'm sure for many others, it starts to make you wonder, wait, like, is this how our mind works? Like, why is the LLM so good? And is this how I have learned things? Maybe talk to us a little bit about the similarities or differences between the way transformers work and the human mind.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something I thought a lot about. I think a little bit less about these days, I guess, but I've definitely thought a lot about this question. The similarity between the two is at a particular level of analysis. So the brain is not literally a transformer. It doesn't have that same architecture. It's not doing exactly that thing of having an attentional pass on a layer and moving that to the next layer. But at a high level, I think what modern transformers are doing, what a lot of different neural network models are doing, is essentially just high-dimensional function approximation. Right?
Can you?
Sorry. So basically, in most machine learning cases, you're trying to predict something from something else.
Okay.
Right. So there's a function that takes the input and goes to the output, and that's what you're trying to learn. And those functions are often really complicated functions. Right. You can describe functions in simple ways with like a regression model. That's not a very complicated function. But most real functions are much more wiggly than that, right? Very complex functions that you have to use a lot of different parameters to describe. And neural networks, it turns out, are really good at doing that. They have a lot of parameters that you can wiggle, and if you do gradient descent, that is a process that can make the network learn kind of functions of arbitrary complexity if you have enough data. I think there's a lot of evidence that at least parts of learning in the brain work kind of that same way. They also have a lot of degrees of freedom to approximate functions on the basis of seeing lots of data. brains are kind of prediction machines in that same way. So I think that's a lot of the similarity. I think actually back when I was working in this space, the regime was such that as our AI models got better, they also became better approximations to what humans did. That is actually changing now, though, because now our models are actually getting, as they kind of get like superhuman in certain domains, like in visual image recognition and things like that, they're actually now starting to look less like humans. They're starting to diverge a bit, so kind of interesting.
Why is that? Just because the different types of data you can train them on now? Like, unpack that for us if you don't mind.
Yeah. It's a great question. So I think we don't know for sure, but the speculation is, I would guess the reason for this is that when models are just to make a very fuzzy kinds of predictions for the world, like they're not that great at predictions, human predictions are pretty good. And so if you make the predictions better, they're going to look a little more like humans, because human predictions are pretty good. But once the predictions get as good as humans or even better than humans, then now making it better might take it further from what humans look like, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow. So you're doing this type of research for years, and then Duolingo comes along and says, "Hey, stop doing that. Come build consumer products with us." Tell us what that was like.
Yeah. So this was an exciting time. I was a professor at Northwestern. I was doing a mix of teaching and research. The research that I was doing was working with different communities of people. People who understood the brain, people who understood, how people think, people who, did AI. And at Duolingo, the opportunity was very different. It was very different in a lot of ways. So Duolingo had very large amounts of data. We have possibly the world's largest data set about learning. This is, I don't actually remember what it was at the time. These days, though, Duolingo learners do about 10 billion exercises every week, and we get data about all that we can use to personalize learning and build models of learning. And so I think the opportunity in terms of research, just by having access to all that data, was quite large. That was a big part of what drew me there. I think I was also doing a lot of teaching at the time as a professor, and realizing that being a single person teaching like a single class there are obviously some advantages to it, but it is not the most efficient thing in the world, as you can scale education much more highly. At Duolingo, by contrast, you do a single A/B test and it's affecting tens of millions of users every day. It's a way to have a lot more impact in terms of education. And I think that the opportunity of just helping define, what does the future of education look like when you put together the power of a well-designed consumer app with very large amounts of data and AI.
So fascinating. I think probably most people, especially people not in this room, just normal average consumers who don't think about AI and AI products, probably don't think of Duolingo as an AI company, but clearly they've been thinking about it and building the space for years. Like, what are some of the ways that Duolingo has leveraged AI and machine learning over the past 5 years or so since you joined?
Yeah. So that's right. So actually, Duolingo's history with AI goes back even before I joined. It's been really since the beginning of the company that they've been doing some AI. The first, about over 10 years ago, the first AI models that Duolingo was building were in the service of using people's learning data to personalize learning experience. So, for example, one of the first models was a model to use to figure out where to place people. If you say, "Hey, I already know some Spanish, where should you start in the course?" We have to give you, an efficient test to figure out where to place you. That's, AI behind making that test efficient, so that it's not like a test when you're trying to place into Spanish at college, where you go take an hour-long test somewhere. People are not going to download Duolingo and then go do an hour-long test to start Duolingo with it. It's not going to happen. So we need to make that efficient. Or another one was trying to predict, what words people know and which ones they need to practice, right? Things like that. So there was a lot of AI around personalization at that early on, and that is still a big part of the AI that we do. Over the past, I would say 5 years, since we had like a proper AI group, that has really expanded to lots of different parts of the company now. And I would say over the past year, that's accelerated even further, expanding into even more parts of the company. And so that includes things like, we have a Duolingo English test, which is an English certification test, like the TOEFL, where the people might take to go study in an English-speaking country, typically. That test uses AI to help generate test questions, to help with grading. It's also a test you take at home, so it's remotely proctored. We use AI for security to prevent different types of cheating, things like that too. One of the things that Duolingo is known for is being a very engaging product. As we found, that's one of the real secret sauces to getting people to actually learn languages, is that you have to keep coming back to learn it. That's the only way. And so we focused a lot on engagement. AI is useful there in several ways. Some of those things that you would recognize from other consumer apps, like Duolingo's notifications that we send people, are optimized with AI. But also building kind of delightful, more interactive experiences. That's another big thing that we're doing with AI.
So Duolingo used to be a startup, not a startup anymore. I think it's, last I checked, something like a $9 or $10 billion market cap publicly traded company. But clearly, thinking about innovation and thinking about sort of the forefront of AI, there are a lot of startups out there that are moving insanely fast, right? And just shipping new stuff constantly. How does a big company like Duolingo keep pace and innovate at the level and speed of a startup in this moment of sort of AI explosion?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a lot of different ways I could take the answer. One way of taking this is to say that the advantage of being the dominant player in this space right now is the data. We have access to lots and lots of 10 billion exercises people do every week, and we are, as we have been for a while, we're investing more and more in trying to leverage all that data to really make the experience better and better, and get that into feedback loops with our AI models, right? So that as we make the experience even better, then we get even more user data, and then we can make the AI models even better. So I think data is one way that we're thinking about this. But the other thing I would say is that I'm not sure how unique Duolingo is in this regard, but it is certainly the case that we are, there's a lot of excitement about AI throughout the whole company right now. There are lots and lots of different teams exploring lots and lots of different directions. Multiple teams working on things like more conversational experiences, or teams working on generating longer form content, like a little radio show that you watch. That's actually just launched, I think, in certain courses. Yeah, right. Where we are using AI in a way to make a feature that just wouldn't have been at all feasible before. So I think it can be a tricky problem, but I think that by investigating AI in lots of different places, we're innovating pretty quickly.
Duolingo, as you mentioned earlier, has possibly more data in the space of education than any other company, and you're leveraging it right now to change language learning and learning more broadly right now. But if you were to extrapolate and look 10 years into the future, how do you think education will be transformed by AI?
So, okay, the first thing I feel like I have to say here is that 10 years feels like an eternity right now, given how fast things are changing.
5 years.
I feel like 2.5, I can maybe kind of say something, although even then I have to be very humble and cautious. This stuff is, I've been working in AI for a very long time, and just the pace of progress in the past year has been quite surprising. So that said, I do think that there are two themes that I see as going to be really transformative in the learning space. One of those, I think, following up on what I've already been talking about a little bit, is personalization. I think just being able to have a product that knows you extremely deeply, knows exactly what you know, knows how you're learning, and knows when you're going to learn, all of that, and uses that to really optimize learning for you in particular. I think that is something that we've been making steady progress on, but I think as AI is advancing quickly, that is something that's going to get much, much better at Duolingo and possibly at other places. The other, I think, theme there is going to be more richly interactive experiences, right? So for language learning, one thing that this might look like is having a lot more realistic conversational partners or something like that, right? Who are also adapting things, to your level and helping out fill in parts that you're clearly not understanding and things like that in a realistic way that gives you, the confidence to go have a real world conversation. But I think in a lot of other parts of education, this might look more like you're trying to understand some, scientific concept, and you don't quite understand a part of it, and you can, ask useful follow-up questions to some agent, and critically, trust what the agent how the agent answers those. That's you can kind of do this now, but you can't the trust part is not there. So I think those are going to be the two themes that really change what education can look like.
And when do you think it leaps from, self-serve consumer tech product that I download on my phone to being in the classroom? And maybe what types of classrooms do you think we'll first sort of really see AI enter?
Yeah, that's an interesting question too. Duolingo is already, so two things. Duolingo in particular, it has been a consumer-focused, education company. One of the few, I would say, that in people layers and ed tech that are not focused on selling to schools. But that said, we are in fact in the majority of school classrooms already. People use Duolingo as supplementary materials in the majority of foreign language classrooms in the US and in many other countries as well.
At all grade levels?
I think so. Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. I mean,
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy when I first heard this. But yeah, it's all over the place. Often it's not the primary mode of instruction, right? But it's more teachers will assign people doing a little bit, or it will be okay, if you finish this thing early, you go do some Duolingo or different things like that. And so I think that having that kind of personalized study aid is something that is already having an effect in a lot of classrooms where the people who finish early can actually go learn more on Duolingo, which actually knows they're at a more advanced level, and they can get that, while the teacher then spends their time focusing on the students who actually need a little extra human assistance. That is already happening to some extent.
Yeah, and that's probably happening. I mean, definitely heard anecdotally that's happening with ChatGPT, right? Students are using ChatGPT to supplement their studies in the classroom, so that makes sense.
Yep.
I'm curious to imagine what the next phase of that might be, right? And I guess language learning is a great example of where that is already happening.
Yeah. I mean, as a personal tutor that's in your pocket gets more and more powerful, I think the role of what is a classroom and what are classrooms for, I think will have to change to some extent, right? I think the most important part that I think we are unlikely to replace for a very long time about teachers is the humanness, right? The human touch, the human relationship that gives people the motivation to do something or to believe in themselves enough that they can do something, right? I think that those aspects of teachers are things that maybe someday in a sci-fi novel robots can do or machines can do, but for quite a while you really need teachers to do these things.
And you need the peers, right? You need your peer group, you need your classmates. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what happens there as well. If the teachers could be supplemented or long day even, potentially, an AI tutor, but what happens about your classmates? You need that connectivity, you need that community to learn, right? So, what happens there? Yeah,
that's an interesting question. I asked, Duolingo has leaderboards where, which many people find extremely motivating. That's not the same as I think your peers in the classroom. But yeah, I think there's a tension a little bit, right, between learning as a social thing and learning that is deeply personalized to be exactly what you in particular need right now, right? Because if everyone is learning on their own personal trajectories, then you might have less in common with your with the other people in your class.
You have been, as we've talked about a couple of times here, you've been thinking about AI long before many of us. What surprised you most about the past year since ChatGPT launched? Maybe you saw that coming. Many people didn't. But what has surprised you?
Yeah. So in full transparency, I did not. I saw ChatGPT coming. I did not see GPT-4 coming. And we actually saw. So Duolingo got early access to GPT-4 back in September before ChatGPT was a thing. Did not see that coming. That was pretty shocking. I think the quantitative progress that the models have made in terms of scaling them is actually very predictable, has been very predictable for a while, but the translation of that into real world impact was very surprising. So that was honestly the biggest surprise, was the first time of seeing GPT-4 and what it could do.
So you're saying even the capabilities of GPT-4 surprised you?
the capabilities of GPT-4 surprised me, certainly. I mean, that was, for people who are working in this space for a long time and using lots of large language models, it was just a substantial advance, and one that no one else has actually quite gotten to yet, right? But yeah, otherwise, I think maybe one other thing that comes to mind, a slightly less technical point from the past year that surprised me in a way, is that it's really changed like who is involved in the AI conversation, right? Like it used to be the case that a lot of companies where there were AI experts that are like, hey, we should use AI to do X, and you have to go convince other people like, oh yeah, okay, sure, yeah, we can try AI for that, yeah, let's do it. But now it's like every executive at any company is like, oh, we should use AI. Let's use AI for this. Let's use it for that. So I think that is very different in a surprising new way. Another part of what's different, or another related piece, is that AI is much more democratized, right? Like 2 years ago, to do any real stuff with AI, you had to know a decent amount about AI, and a decent amount of technical knowledge about it, right? Be somewhat of an expert there. And now, anyone who can talk can do some useful AI with, a large language model.
You mean about the usability of the products, or you mean training new models?
Good clarification question. I mean, if you want to build a new AI feature,
okay,
right? If you're doing it by basically like prompting a large language model, anyone who can write language can do that. You don't have to have any idea how the model works. And so that is the kind of democratization I mean, where AI experts have a somewhat different role to play now.
What are, maybe outside of education, some of the things coming in terms of AI that most excite you over the next year or so? We won't say 5 years or 10 years, over the next 1 year.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always hard to predict what's going to come, but yeah, we've been talking about education for a while. I will say, one other area that I am particularly excited about is I'm curious to see how this is going to play out in the kind of bio and medicine domains. I think there was just the past few days, I think, there's a paper from, I believe, DeepMind, where they used AI to predict like a very large number of new like crystalline materials for like material science stuff. But this is, it seems like a pretty big advance for that field. I'm very excited to see, what a similar result looks like in the biospace, right? I have to imagine a lot of this is coming, and I think it's very exciting to see what the possibilities could be.
Well, I could ask you questions all night, but I know people in the audience have questions as well. So we're gonna open it up to audience Q&A. If you're in the audience and you have a question, somebody's gonna bring a microphone over to you. If you just raise your hand, please wait to ask your question until you have the mic, since, as I mentioned, we're recording this. And just say your name and what you're working on, and then fire away with your question.
Hey, how's it going? My name's Cyrus. Thanks for the talk. I really enjoyed it. I most recently worked in financial technology at Stripe. I left recently pursuing a number of AI opportunities. I worked in edtech for a long time, including a company named Quizlet, which is a well-known consumer product, also does AI tutoring. One thing that I found at Quizlet during my several years there is that certain modalities in learning were really tricky to solve via AI. Or for instance, you were talking about the English proficiency test. Speaking and writing were really hard to sort of get automated answers against, versus multiple choice questions, reading comprehension, et cetera. I'm curious how developments in the last year, or imminent developments moving forward, are allowing you to, for instance, grade someone's writing better. I know that Duolingo has some speech recognition, but you alluded to this concept of multi-turn conversations. If you could walk me through what your thoughts are in terms of present day, what it's improving, and maybe in the next year or two, what's gonna go on over there as well, that would be super interesting.
Thanks. That's a great question. Those are you're right. Those are certainly some of the challenging problems that we face. So what's been happening in the past year there that has made some advances. One of the reasons that speech is really hard to work with, both for like proficiency test or for just language learning applications, right, is that speech recognition is not a completely solved problem, right? Especially in the case of people having very strong accents, especially people who are learning a language, right? Or are non-native speakers of a language, and especially if you're doing it in a somewhat noisy environment, right? But I think speech recognition has also advanced quite a lot in the past year. To name one, the latest like Whisper model from OpenAI. Sorry to keep talking about OpenAI. I guess it is their anniversary of ChatGPT today.
That's right, 1 year today, right? Also, they've been in the news a bunch lately, so top of mind.
It's true. Yeah, that was a week. So the Whisper model, for example, we found to be hugely better at speech recognition than a lot of other models that we had been using, and that has been really game-changing for a lot of what we can do with those features. I think it doesn't fully solve the problem, and we have a lot of in-house research on how we can do better on, in particular, like learner language, right? Like English from people who are learning English early on, for example. But in terms of grading writing and things like that, I think that is where the current generation of large language models really shine, right? I mean, you can, at a high level, I mean, you could just like ask a large language model, here's how we think about grading essays. Here's an essay. What do you think it should be graded, right? We're not doing just that, but you can do that and get quite far, actually, quite a good start. And so I think as large language models get better, as speech recognition technology gets better, these problems get easier.
Hi, I'm Bhargav, and it's just exciting to hear your story because I'm kind of 6 years, before 6 years, because I'm in academia now, and I came actually from industry into academia, but in cognitive science, and basically that's why I could connect to what you were describing. So my question to you is a bit abstract as well. So there is a certain history and philosophy of language and how it played a role in civilization and how basically we evolved, right? Different languages in different places. Now, if you agree that a lot of the recent progress, whether it's LLMs or just ChatGPT itself, is owing to the great computational power that we could get in the past few years, and then the current pace, acceleration that it's going, are you still wary of some plateau that we might hit in the coming years in this side of things, just by the virtue of the structure of language or what we can learn from how it played a role? So do you see any kind of plateau that we might hit, even despite this computational power and this innovation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's not, to me, it's not a very abstract question. It's a very practical question that is a central one, I think, for the coming couple of years, right? Like we've, as I mentioned, like as you analyze these models, like large language models, to take a single example, you can quantitatively analyze them. Like when you train these models, they're basically predicting the next word, and you can quantitatively analyze how good are those predictions, right? And people have done large scale studies that show that if I tell you how much compute you use to train the model, basically, how big is the model and how much data did you train it on, you can actually make quite accurate predictions for how accurate those predictions are going to be for each word, right? That has been a law that has scaled many orders of magnitude across the amount of data that you're training and the amount of the model size, right? So progress from that dimension has been very regular. But from that side, we are actually getting, if you think about it, it's just in terms of the amount of compute you use to train the model. We are not that far in terms of orders of magnitude away from the most compute we could use, right? The latest models we're training are quite expensive, and we couldn't increase that by too many factors of 10, I think, at this point, for it to be at all feasible. And so if that is the main way that you're scaling, you might worry, oh wow, maybe we are getting close to hitting a plateau. The flip side to this, though, is the other thing that I said earlier, which is that how you map progress in making those predictions to real-world application usefulness is nonlinear, right? So for a while, you had some predictions, they got better as you scaled, but they were still not that useful. And they got somewhat better, but they were still not very useful, right? And then all of a sudden, around the past few years, they've gotten very, very useful as you've just made that same steady progress. And so we've been in this like exponential. And I think everyone's question is, no one has a real theory about why there's been exponential progress there. And so does that exponential of steady progress keep being exponential? If so, then even if we're about to plateau in terms of the amount of steady progress we can make, it might still produce radical new changes. Or is this an S curve that's about to level out? In which case, maybe we need a new approach. And no one knows the answer to that. So the next couple of years will be very exciting where we find out.
Hi, I'm Imalik Njai. I'm a neuroscientist. I'm also the founder of Ecotone. We build custom foundational models to what you were saying about what is AI in health. So we're building what we call the large genome models. It's a cousin of the LLMs to find out what are the root causes of rare genetic diseases with the goal to make medicines that cure these diseases.
Fascinating.
Thank you. I wanted to just ask you a question about the never-ending question of quality versus quantity. So I think GPT-2 was based on web text, which was on a more scrub side of things. But as the GPTs progressed, they incorporated a common crawl, which was a bit more dirtier, but a lot more data. What is your thinking on that spectrum? And also imagine Duolingo having such a large data set that is probably very well structured, has a combination of quality and quantity, but we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's another great question. It's something that I neglected to mention earlier, which is that it's another reason you might imagine that we're about to hit a plateau, right? Is that we can't scale the compute too many orders of magnitude, but we're sort of common crawl was already like a very large part of the internet, and we're reaching the limits of how many more orders of magnitude we can scale the data as well. One thing that offsets that is the creation of a lot of bespoke data, which I know a lot of companies are doing, creating domain-specific data, which can be very high quality, but of course it is expensive to create as well. I think in terms of how Duolingo is thinking about this, we do a mix of building in-house models on our own data and also fine-tuning external models, on our data. And I think from my perspective, I think everyone is still figuring out how far we can really get with fine-tuning. I think it seems to be the case that the latest generation of models can be fine-tuned with quite a small amount of data to be good at a particular task. And so that raises the question that maybe you can take these kind of generalist models and specialize them for various different tasks with a pretty limited amount of data, then maybe that can actually solve a lot of different data problems.
First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to share some wisdom with us. My name is Zach. I work at Google in ads. And my question for you is something that you said earlier really jumped out to me, but this idea that we may hit a point in the future where machines are able to learn faster and more efficiently than humans. I wonder at what point, when we reach that point, what does that mean for language learning? I mean, how do we lean into that from a user perspective?
It's an interesting question. I think I didn't exactly say that. I think what I said was that at certain tasks, machines can perform better than humans, right? So like recognizing very small images, for example, things like that. But it does also seem plausible that machines, I think they can already learn a lot of things faster than humans can, right? This is already definitely the case. If you have a large data set, I can build a simple regression model or whatever kind of ML model of that data set that I want to really learn a lot of generalizations about the data set much faster than I as a human could look through all the examples and make my own generalizations, right? And so I think, I'm not sure this is exactly a new world at this point. I think it's already the world we're living in, where we found ways of using AI as tools to learn from a lot of things where humans can't conveniently learn very quickly, and humans are sort of focusing more of their time on the kinds of domains where humans still have the advantage.
I'll echo everybody in thanking you for giving the talk. I'm Jack. I'm working on generating timesheets on an automated basis for lawyers, accountants, and consultants, saving them a bunch of time. I'm going to cheat and ask a two-part question. One, kind of tactical. Are there languages that lend themselves better or worse to sort of token-based next word prediction, and how does that impact Duolingo? And then two would be, out of 40,000-foot view, what is the impact of AI on a a thing like Duolingo that helps people learn languages? Like, are we eventually going to have some sort of localization layer that just sits in between two people talking at all times to the point where everyone only ever needs to learn their own language? Or is that so totally sci-fi?
All right, great questions, and saving time on timesheets. It feels very meta. I love it. Let's see, so I'll start with your second question, which was, yes, the layers. So this is a really interesting question, and one that we get a lot, right? It's like, as machine translation gets better and real-time translation, you can already do this on Skype, right? Probably some other services too, where you can have a conversation where basically it is, automatically translating and then doing text-to-speech on your voice, and have a conversation with someone who you don't speak a language in common with. That is already possible. In the future, presumably this will become more widespread in a lot of cases. I think that's right. And so I think the question of what the future of people learning languages is really depends on why people are learning languages. One thing I think I would say is that in a lot of countries, like especially English-speaking countries, people learn languages mostly because they want to connect with a culture, right? Often people's family speaks it, and you want to understand the traditions better, or for various reasons you feel like you just really associate yourself with French culture or something, and you want to learn French for that reason. So I think people learn languages for cultural human connections in a lot of ways, and for that same reason, people who are might want to read an author in the original language, right? Not read a translation, right? Things like that. So I think for that reason, people who are learning languages for passion like that it's not going to go away, I don't think. For people learning languages, especially, so a lot of people learn English, for example, largely for like business and reasons like that. For some of those use cases, yeah, maybe real-time translation can take some of that away. But I think it's also important to realize that real-time translation is always going to have somewhat of a lag, just because like different languages express things in different orders, and there's just ambiguity, and so you always have to like wait a little bit before you can be confident in how you're going to translate something, because you have to kind of know what's coming next. And I think because for that reason, people who are using even an ideal, like perfect, as fast as possible real-time translator will have to be dealing with some lag. And I think if you think about like a business context, you're going to be at a disadvantage to the people who are not doing it with a real-time translator and don't have the lag. So I suspect even then people are likely to be learning languages. We'll see what the future holds. You had a first question too. So you had a technical part of that question, which is whether languages differ in terms of how easy it is to predict the next token, depending on a type of language. I don't know the answer to that part. What is certainly the case is that in the current generation of models, they are certainly best at English, and there's a handful of other languages they are quite good at. But then there's many other languages that they are worse at. And I think probably the main reason for that is just the amount of training data, I'm assuming, but I don't know of any deep analyses on that. That is absolutely something that we have to deal with at Duolingo. For now, we are mostly focusing a lot of our features using these models around the languages that the models work quite well for. But we are starting to do some work in figuring out if you can do a little like fine-tuning to make the models work well for languages that don't have as much data. There was actually a proof of concept of this done with Icelandic as part of the GPT-4 launch, actually, that OpenAI did with the Icelandic government, where they showed that with a not super giant amount of Icelandic data, you could fine-tune the model to work pretty well, it seemed like. So it seems promising.
We have time for one more quick question.
Hi, how's it going? Thanks again. Brendan Giles here. We're building AI for data analysts. My question is, do you guys plan to solve the pronunciation problem set? So when you're transcribing, a lot of times if someone mispronounces something, that would never get told as like something they need feedback for. And how do you guys plan to solve that?
I'm not fully sure I understood the question.
So like for learning a language, if you speak it with some sort of mispronunciation of an actual like word or phrase, maybe the AI would pick that up and it would think that it's correct because it's getting better and better over time. But as a human speaker, you might say, hey, you need to enunciate better here or there. Do you guys plan to solve that?
Okay, yes. This is a great question, and it's an interesting issue. There's a lot of complex issues here, right? So there are some very proficient everyone here knows very proficient speakers of a language, let's say English, who have an accent. But nevertheless, they are extremely proficient, speakers of the language. But you can tell, oh yeah, it's somewhat of a Spanish accent or something, right? It doesn't really hinder your understanding of them, right? But obviously there's other speakers who are just learning the language who maybe have, you might call it a very strong accent, but it may be actually very hard to understand them, right? Where it hurts intelligibility there. On the AI side, the speech recognition models are pretty good actually at understanding what the person with the light accent is saying, but they're often not great at figuring out what a person is saying who basically is pronouncing a lot more of the sounds in a non-standard way. But even the light accent is actually like mispronouncing some sounds, right, in terms of how the language is spoken by native speakers. And so there's a tension there between figuring out like, okay, one problem to solve is you have to figure out what is the person actually trying to say, and that is sometimes challenging if people's pronunciation is bad enough. But then once you figure out what they're trying to say, then there's the question of, okay, which parts of that is it worth actually correcting? Which parts is it worth improving? Which parts are, maybe not going to hurt understanding and probably fine? There's some hard problems there, but we are working on those now.
Awesome. Everyone, let's have a huge round of applause for Klinton Bicknell. Thank you so much, Klinton. This has been awesome. Hope you'll stick around for a bit.
Yeah, a pleasure chatting with you, and thanks everyone for all the great questions.
Thanks for listening to Generative Now. If you liked what you heard, please rate and review the episode. It really does help. And if you want to follow us, you can follow me at Mignano on all the socials, or Lightspeed at LightspeedVP on all the socials. Generative Now is produced by Lightspeed in partnership with Pod People. I am Michael Mignano, and we will be back next week with another awesome conversation. See you then.